All right, we are almost to the end of our book. Chapter 18, Where the River Goes. For a second, Lena saw the banks of the river streak by. Ahead was the opening of the tunnel, like an enormous mouth. They plunged into it and left the light of the pipeworks behind. In complete darkness, the boat pitched and rolled, and Lena in the bottom of it banged from side to side, gripping Poppy with one arm and grabbing with the other hand for anything to hold on to. Dune slid into her, and she slid into the boxes. Poppy was shrieking wildly. "Dune!" Lena shouted, and he shouted back, "Hold on! Hold on!" But she kept losing her grip on the edge of the boat and being flung sideways. She was terrified that Poppy would slam into the metal bench or be torn from her arms and tossed into the river. The boat hit something and shuddered, then raced on. It felt like being swallowed, this rushing through the dark with the river roaring like 1,000 voices. Lena's legs were tangled with Dune's, and Poppy's arms were so tight around her neck that she could hardly breathe. But it was the dark that was most terrible. Going so fast into the dark. She closed her eyes. If they were going to smash into a wall or plunge into a bottomless hole, there was nothing she could do about it. All she could do was hold tight to Poppy. She did that for what seemed a long time. And then, at last, the current slowed, and the boat stopped thrashing about so wildly. Lena managed to sit up, and she felt Dune moving too. Poppy's shrieks turned to whimpers. The darkness was still complete, but Lena sensed space above and around her. Where were they? She had to see. "Dune," she said, "are you all right? Can you find us a candle?" "I'll try," Dune said. She felt him scramble past her to the back of the boat, and she heard a scrape as he pulled a box out from its place under the bench. "Can't find the latch," Dune said. Then a second later, "There, I've got it. This is the matches, so this one must be candles." More scraping and banging. The boat lurched. Lena slid forward. Dune slid too and slammed into her back. He gave a yell of rage. "Drop the match. Hold on, I almost had it." Long seconds of scrambling and clattering. Then a light flared up, and Dune's shadowed face appeared above it. He touched the match to the candle, and the light grew steadier. It was only a small flame, but it cast glints of light on the tunnel walls and the silky surface of the water. The tunnel had an arched ceiling, Lena saw, like the tunnels of the pipeworks, but it was much wider than those tunnels. The river ran through it like a moving road. "Can you light another?" Lena asked. Dune nodded and turned back to the boxes. But once again, the boat struck something, causing a spray of water to slap into them and put the candle out. It was several minutes before Dune managed to light it again, and more before he finally had two burning ones at once. He jammed one of them into a space between the bench and the side of the boat, and he held the other in his hand. His hair was flattened against his forehead and dripping. His brown jacket was torn at the shoulder. "That's better," he said. It was better, but not only did they have light to see, but the current was slower and the boat sailed more smoothly. Lena was able to unwrap Poppy from her neck and look around. Ahead, she could see that the tunnel curved. The boat swung into the curve, banged against the wall, straightened itself, and sped on. "Hand me a candle too," she said. Dune gave Lena the candle he was holding and lit another. They found places to wedge all three candles into the frame of the boat so they could keep their hands free. For a while they rushed along almost silently, the river having become nearly as smooth as sheets of glass. Then suddenly the current slowed even more, and the tunnel opened out. "We've come into a room," said Lena. Far overhead arched a vaulted ceiling. Columns of rock hung down from it, and columns of rock rose from the water too, making long shadows that turned and mingled as the rock floated among them. They glimmered in the candlelight, pink and pale green and silver. Their strange lumpy shapes looked like something soft that had frozen, like towers of mashed potatoes, Lena thought, that had hardened to stone. Now and then the boat bumped into one of these columns, and they found that they could use a paddle to knock themselves free again. In this way they crossed the room to the other side, where again the passage narrowed and the current ran faster. Much faster. It was as if the boat were being pulled forward by a powerful hand. The water grew rough again, and the splashes of spray put out their candles. Lena and Dune huddled in the bottom of the boat with Poppy between them, their arms clasped around her. They clenched their teeth and squeezed their eyes shut, and soon there was nothing in their minds but the roll and plunge of the boat, and nothing in their bodies but the effort not to be thrown out. Once the sound of the river rose to a crashing, and the front of the boat tipped downward, and they were pitched about so violently that it seemed they were tumbling downstairs. But that lasted only a few seconds, and then they were streaming onward as before. Lena lost track of time. But a while later, maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour, the current slowed. The candles they'd stuck in the boat had been knocked overboard, so Dune lit new ones. They saw that they had come to another pool. There were no lumpy columns of rock here. Nothing interrupted the wide, flat surface of the water, which stretched out before them in the flickering light from their candles. The ceiling was smooth and only about 10 feet above their heads. The boat drifted, as if it had lost its sense of direction. Using a paddle to poke against the walls, Dune guided the boat around the edge of the pool. "I don't see where the river goes on," said Dune. "Do you?" "No," said Lena. "Unless it's there, where it flows into that little gap." She pointed to a crack in the wall only a few inches wide. "But the boat can't go there." "No, it's much too small." He pulled the boat forward. Their shadows moved with them along the wall. "Want to go home," said Poppy. "We're almost there," Lena told her. "We certainly can't go back the way we came," said Dune. "No." Lena dipped a hand in the water. "It's so cold." It sent an ache up her arm. "Could this be the end?" said Dune. His voice sounded flat in this closed-in place. "The end?" Lena felt a shiver of fear. "I mean the end of the trip," Dune said. "Maybe we're supposed to get out over there." He pointed to a wide expanse of rock that sloped back into the darkness on one side of the pool. Everywhere else, the walls rose straight out of the water. He pulled the boat over to the rock slope. The boat scraped bottom here. The water was shallow. "I'll get out and see if it goes anywhere," said Lena. "I want to be on solid ground again anyway." She handed Poppy to Dune and stood up. Holding a candle, she put one foot over the edge of the boat and into the cold water, and she waded ashore. The way did not look promising. The ground sloped upward, and the ceiling sloped downward. As she went further back, she had to stoop. A few yards in, a tumbled heap of rocks blocked the way. She inched around them, turning sideways to squeeze through the narrow space, and crept forward, holding the candle out in front of her. This was nowhere, she thought. We're trapped. A few steps further, she found she could stand up straight again. And a few steps beyond that, she turned a corner, and suddenly, candlelight shone on a wide path with a high ceiling and a smooth floor. Lena gave a wild shout. "Here it is!" she cried. "It's here! There's a path!" Dune's voice came from far away. She couldn't tell what he was saying. She made her way back toward the boat, and when it came in sight, she yelled again, "I found a path! A path!" Dune scrambled out and waded ashore, carrying Poppy. He set her down, and then he and Lena took hold of the boat and hauled it as far as they could up the slope of rock. Poppy caught the excitement. She shouted gleefully, waving her fists like little clubs, and stomped around, glad to be on her feet again. She found a pebble and plunked it into the water, crowing happily at the splash it made. "I want to see the path," said Dune. "Go up that way," Lena said to him, "and around the pile of rocks. I'll stay here and take things out of the boat." Dune went, taking another candle from the box in the boat. Lena sat Poppy down in a kind of nook formed by a roundish boulder and a hollow in the wall. "Don't move from here," she said. Then she pulled Dune's bundle from under the seat of the boat. It was damp, but not soaked. Maybe the food inside would still be all right. She was hungry all of a sudden. She had no dinner, she remembered. It must be the middle of the night by now, or maybe even morning again. She carried Dune's bundle ashore along with the boxes of candles and matches, and she set them down. Dune came back. His eyes were glowing, the reflection of a tiny flame dancing in each one. That's it for sure, he said. We've made it. Then his eyes shifted. What's Poppy got? He asked. Lena whipped around. In Poppy's hands was something dark and rectangular. It wasn't a stone. It was more like a packet of some kind. She was plucking and pulling at it. She lifted it to her mouth as if to tear it with her teeth, and Lena jumped to her feet. Stop! She shouted. Poppy, startled, dropped the packet and began to cry. It's all right. Never mind, Lena said, retrieving what Poppy had been about to chew on. Come and have some dinner now. Hush, we're going to have dinner. I'm sure you're hungry. In the light of Dune's candle, with Poppy squirming on Lena's lap, they examined Poppy's find. The packet was wrapped in slippery greenish material and bound up with a strap. It wasn't wrapped very well. It looked as if someone had bundled it up quickly. The material was loose and blotched with whitish mold. Lena edged the strap off carefully. It was partly rotten. On the end of it was a small square buckle covered with rust. She folded back the wrapping. Dune took a sharp breath. It's a book, he said. He moved his candle closer, and Lena opened the brown cover. The pages inside had faint blue lines across them, and someone had written along these lines in slanted black letters, which were not neat like the writing in the library books, but sprawling as if the writer had been in a hurry. Dune ran his finger under the first line. It says, they tell us we leave. They tell us we leave tonight. He looked up and met Lena's eyes. Leave? Said Lena. From where? From Ember? Dune asked. Could someone have come this way before us? Or was it someone leaving the other city? Dune looked down at the book again. He rifled through the pages. There were many of them. Let's save it, said Lena. We'll read it when we get to the new city. Dune nodded. It will be easier to see then. So Lena wrapped up the book again and tied it securely into Dune's bundle. They sat on the rock shelf for a while, eating the food Dune had brought. The candles wedged in the boat still shone steadily, and their light was cozy, like lamplight. It made golden shapes on the still surface of the pond. Dune said, I saw the guards run after you. Tell me what happened. Lena told him. And what about Poppy? What did you tell Mrs. Murdo? I told her the truth. At least I hope it's the truth. I caught up with her on the way home after the singing. She'd seen the posters. She was terrified. But before she could ask questions, I just said she must give Poppy to me. I said I was taking her to safety because that's what I suddenly realized on the roof of the gathering hall. Dune, I'd been thinking before that I had to leave Poppy because she'd be safe with Mrs. Murdo. But when the lights went out, I suddenly knew. There is no safety in Ember. Not for long. Not for anyone. I couldn't leave her behind. Whatever happens to us now, it's better than what's going to happen there. And did you explain all that to Mrs. Murdo? No. I was in a terrible hurry to get to the pipeworks and meet you, and I knew I had to go while there were still crowds in the street, so it would be harder for the guards to see me. I just said I was taking Poppy to safety. Mrs. Murdo handed her over, but she sort of sputtered, where and why? And I said, you'll know in a few days. It's all right. And then I ran. So you gave her the note then? Said Dune, the one meant for Clary. Oh, Clary stared at him stricken. The message to Clary? She put her hand in her pocket and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. I forgot all about it. All I was thinking of was getting Poppy and getting to you. So no one knows about the room full of boats? Lena just shook her head, her eyes wide. How will we get back to tell them? We can't. Dune, said Lena, if we'd told people right away, even just a few people, if we hadn't decided to be grand and announce it at the singing. I know, said Dune, but we didn't. That's all. We didn't tell, and now No one knows. I did leave a message for my father, though. He told Lena about pinning his last-minute message to the kiosk in Silverton Square. I said we'd found the way out and that it was in the pipeworks, but that's not much help. Clary has seen the instructions, Lena said. She knows there's an egress. She might find it. Or she might not. There was nothing to be done about it, and so they put the supplies back into Dune's pillowcase and got ready to go. Lena used Dune's rope to make a leash for Poppy. She tied one end around Poppy's waist and the other around her own. She filled her pockets with packs of matches, and Dune put all the remaining candles in his sack. In case they arrived in the new city at night, he filled his bottle with river water, lit a candle for himself and one for Lena, and thus equipped, they left the boat behind and crept up the rocky shelf to the path. Chapter 19. A World of Light. As they squeezed past the rocks at the entrance of the path, Dune thought he saw the candlelight glance off of a shiny place on the wall. He stopped to look, and when he saw what it was, he called out to Lena, who was a few steps ahead of him. There's a notice! It was a framed sign bolted to the stone, a printed sheet behind a piece of glass. Dampness had seeped under the glass and made splotches on the paper, but by holding their candles up close, they could read it. Welcome, refugees from Ember. This is the final stage of your journey. Be prepared for a climb that will take several hours. Fill your bottles with water from the river. We wish you good fortune. The Builders. They're expecting us, said Lena. Well, they wrote this a long time ago, Dune said. The people who put it here must all be dead by now. That's true. But they wished us good fortune. It makes me feel as if they're watching over us. Yes, and maybe their great-great-great-grandchildren will be there to welcome us. Encouraged, they started up the path. The candles made only a feeble glow, but they could tell that the path was quite wide. The ceiling was high over their heads, and the path seemed to have been made for a great company of people. In some places, the ground beneath their feet was rutted in parallel grooves, as if a wheeled cart of some kind had been driven over it. After they had walked a while, they realized that they were moving in long zigzags. The path would go in one direction for some time and then turn sharply and go the opposite way. As they went along, they talked less and less. The path sloped relentlessly upward, and they needed their breath just for breathing. The only sound was the light pat-pat of their footsteps. Lena and Dune took turns carrying Poppy on their backs. She'd gotten tired of walking very soon and cried to be picked up. Twice they stopped and sat down to rest, leaning against the walls of the passage and taking drinks from Dune's bottle of water. How many hours do you think we've been walking? Lena asked. I don't know, Dune said. Maybe 2, maybe 3. We must be nearly there. They climbed on and on. Their first candles had long ago burned down to the last inch, as had their second candles. Finally, when their third ones were about halfway gone, Lena began to notice that the air smelled different. The cold, sharp-edged rock smell of the tunnel was changing to something softer, a strange, lovely smell. As they rounded a corner, a gust of this soft air swept past them, and their candles went out. Dune said, I'll find a match. But Lena said, no, wait, look. They were not in complete darkness. A faint haze of light shone in the passage ahead of them. It's the lights of the city, breathed Lena. Lena set Poppy down. Quick, Poppy, she said. And Poppy began to trot, keeping close at Lena's heels. The strange, lovely smell in the air grew stronger. The passage came to an end a few yards further along, and before them was an opening like a great empty door. Without a word, Lena and Dune took hold of each other's hands, and Lena took hold of Poppy's. When they stood in the doorway and looked out, they saw no new city at all, but something infinitely stranger. A land vast and spacious beyond any of their dreams, filled with air that seemed to move, and lit by a shining silver circle hanging in the immense black sky. In front of their feet, the ground swept away in a long, gentle slope. It was not bare stone as in Ember. Something soft covered it, like silvery hair as high as their knees. Down the slope was a tumble of dark, rounded shapes, and then another slope rose beyond that. Way off into the distance, as far as they could see, the land lay in rolling swells, with clumps of shadow in the low places between them. "Dune!" cried Lena. "More lights!" She pointed at the sky. He looked up and saw them. Hundreds and hundreds of tiny flecks of light, strewn like spilled salt across the blackness. Stars. "Oh," she whispered. There was nothing else to say. The beauty of these lights made his breath stop in his throat. They took a few steps forward. Dune bent to feel strands that grew out of the ground almost higher than Poppy's head. They were cool and smooth and soft, and there was dampness on them. "Breathe," said Lena. She opened her mouth and took a long breath of air. Dune did the same. "It's sweet," he said. "So full of smells." They held their hands out to feel the long stems as they waded slowly through them. The air moved against their faces and in their hair. "Hear those sounds?" said Dune. A high, thin, chirping sound came from somewhere nearby. It was repeated over and over like a question. "Yes," said Lena. "What could it be?" "Something alive, I think. Maybe some kind of bug." "A bug that sings." Lena turned to Dune. Her face was shadowy in the silver light. "It's so strange here, Dune, and so huge. But I'm not afraid." "No, I'm not either. It feels like a dream." "A dream, yes. Maybe that's why it feels familiar. I might have dreamed about this place." They walked until they came to where the dark shapes billowed up from the ground. These were plants, they discovered, taller than they were, with stems as hard and thick as the walls of houses, and leaves that spread out over their heads. On the slope beside these plants, they sat down. "Do you think there is a city here somewhere?" Lena asked. "Or any people at all?" "I don't see any lights," Dune said, "even far off. But with this silver lamp in the sky, maybe they don't need lights." Dune shook his head doubtfully. "People would need more lights than this," he said. "How could you see well enough to work? How would you grow your food? It's a beautiful light, but not bright enough to live by. Then what shall we do if there's no city and no people?" I don't know. Dune didn't feel like thinking. He was tired of figuring things out. He wanted to look at this new world and take in the scent of it and feel of it and figure things out later. Lena felt the same way. She stopped asking questions, drew Poppy onto her lap, and gazed in silence at the glimmering landscape. After a while, she became aware that something strange was happening. Surely, when she had first sat down, the silver circle was just above the highest branch of the tall plant. Now the branch cut across it, and as she watched, the circle sank very slowly down until it was hidden, except for a gleam of brightness behind the leaves. "It's moving," she said to Dune. "Yes." A little later, it seemed to her that her eyes were blurring. There was a fuzziness in the sky, especially around the edges. It took a while for her to realize what was making the fuzziness. "Light," she said. "I see it," said Dune. "It's getting brighter." The edge of the sky turned gray, and then pale orange, and then deep, fiery crimson. The land stood out against it, a long, black, rolling line. One spot along this line grew so bright they could hardly look at it. So bright it seemed to take a bite out of the land. It rose higher and higher until they could see that it was a fiery circle, first deep orange, then yellow, and too bright to look at any longer. The color seeped out to the sky and washed over the land. Light sparkled on the soft hair of the hills and shone through the lacy leaves as every shade of green sprang to life around them. They lifted their faces to the astonishing warmth. The sky arched over them higher than they could have imagined, a pale, clear blue. Lena felt as though a lid that had been on her all her life had been lifted off. Light and air rushed through her, making a song like the songs of Ember, only it was a song of joy. She looked at Dune and saw that he was smiling and crying at the same time, and she realized that she was too. Everything around them was springing to life. A glorious racket came from the branches, tweedling notes, peeps, burbles, high, sharp calls. Bugs? Wondered Dune, imagining with awe the bugs that could make such sounds. But then he saw something fly from the cluster of leaves and swoop down low across the ground, making a clear, sweet call as it flew. "Did you see that?" he said to Lena, pointing. "And there's another one. And there! There! Repeated Poppy, leaping from Lena's lap and whirling around, pointing in every direction. The air was full of them now. They were much too large to be insects. One of them lit nearby on a stem. It looked to them with two bright black eyes, and opening its mouth, which was pointed like a thorn, sent forth a little trill. "It's speaking to us," said Dune. "What could it be?" Lena just shook her head. The little creature shifted its claw-like feet on the stem, flapped its brown wings, and trilled again. Then it leapt into the air and was gone. They leapt up too, and threw themselves into exploration. The ground was alive with insects, so many that Dune just laughed in helpless wonder. Flowers bloomed among the green blades, and a stream ran at the foot of the hill. They roamed over the green-coated slopes, running, sliding, calling out to each other with each new discovery until they were exhausted. Then they sat down by the entrance to the path to eat what they had left of their food. They untied Dune's bundle, and Lena suddenly cried out, "The book! We forgot about the book!" There it was, wrapped in its blotched green cloth. "Let's read it out loud while we eat," said Dune. Lena opened the fragile notebook and laid it on the ground in front of her. She picked up a carrot with one hand, and with the other she kept her place on the scribbled page. This is what she read. The Last Message, Chapter 20. Friday. They tell us we leave tonight. I knew it would be soon. The training has been over for nearly a month now, but it still feels sudden. Feels like a shock. Why did I agree to this? I'm an old woman, too tired to take up a new life. I wish now that I'd said no when they asked me. I put everything I can into my one suitcase. Clothes, shoes, a good wind-up clock, some soap, an extra pair of glasses. Bring no books, they said, and no photographs. We have been told to say nothing ever again about the world we come from. But I'm going to take this notebook anyhow. I'm determined to write down what happens. Someday someone may need to know. Saturday. I went to the train station yesterday evening, as they told me to, and got on the train they told me to take. It took us through Spring Valley, and I gazed out the window at the fields and houses of the place I was saying goodbye to, my home and my family's home for generations. I rode for 2 hours until the train reached the station in the hills. When I arrived, they met me, 3 men in suits, and drove me to a large building, where they led me down a corridor into a big room full of other people, all with suitcases, most with gray or white hair. Here we have been waiting now for more than an hour. They have spent years and years making this plan. It's supposed to ensure that, no matter what happens, people won't disappear from the earth. Some say that will never happen anyhow. I'm not so sure. Disaster seems very close. Everything will be all right, they tell us, but only a few people believe them. Why, if it's going to be all right, do we see it getting worse every day? And of course this plan is proof that they think the world is doomed. All the best scientists and engineers have been pulled in to work on it. Extraordinary efforts have been made. Efforts that would have done more good elsewhere. I think it's the wrong answer. But they asked me if I would go. I suppose because I've spent my life on a farm and I know about growing food. In spite of my doubts, I said yes. I'm not sure why. There are 100 of us, 50 men, 50 women. We are all at least 60 years old. There will be 100 babies, too. 2 babies for each pair of parents. I don't know which one of these gentlemen I'll be matched with. We are all strangers to one another. They planned it that way. They said there would be fewer memories between us. They want us to forget everything about the lives we've led and the places we've lived. The babies must grow up with no knowledge of a world outside, so that they feel no sorrow for what they've lost. I hear some noises across the room. I think it's the babies arriving. Yes, here they come. Each being carried by one of those gray-suited men. So many of them, so small. Little scrunched-up faces, tiny fists waving. I must stop for now. They're going to pass them out. Later. We're traveling again on a bus this time. It is night, I think, though it's hard to be sure because they have boarded up the windows of the bus from the outside. They don't want us to know where we're going. I have a baby on my lap, a girl. She has a bright pink face and no hair at all. Stanley, who sits next to me, holds a baby boy with brown skin and a few tufts of black hair. Stanley and I are the keepers of these children. Our task is to raise them in this new place we're going to. By the time they are 20 or so, we'll be gone. They'll be on their own, making a new world. Stanley and I have named these children Star and Forest. Sunday. The buses have stopped. They have not allowed us to get out yet. I can hear crickets singing and smell of grass, so we must be in the country. But it must be night. I'm very tired. What kind of place can this be, safe from earthly catastrophes? All I can guess is that it must be underground. The thought fills me with dread. I'll try to sleep a little now. Later. There was no chance to sleep. They called us off the buses, and we stepped out into a landscape of rolling hills in full moonlight. That's the way we'll be going in, they told us, pointing to a dark opening in the hill we stood on. Form a line there, please. We did so. It was very quiet except for the squalling of a few of the babies. If the others were like me, they were saying goodbye to the world. I reached down to touch the grass and breathed deeply to smell the earth. My eyes swept over the silver hills, and I thought of the animals prowling softly in the shadows or sleeping in their burrows, and the birds standing beneath the leaves of the trees with their head tucked under their wings. Last I raised my eyes to the moon, which smiled down on us from a long, cold distance away. The moon will still be here when they come out, I thought. The moon and the hills, at least. The opening led us into a winding passage that ran steeply downhill for perhaps a mile. It was hard going for me. My legs are not strong anymore. We moved very slowly. The last part was the worst, a rocky slope where it was easy to miss your footing and slip. This led down to a pool. By the shore of the pool, our group of aged pioneers gathered. Motorboats were waiting here for us, equipped with lanterns. When it's time for people to leave this place, is this the way they will come? I asked our pilot, who has a kind face. He said yes. But how will they know there's a way out if no one tells them? I said. How will they know what to do? They're going to have instructions, said the pilot. They won't be able to get at the instructions until the time is right. When they need them, the instructions will be there. But what if they don't find them? What if they never come out again? I think they will. People find a way through just about anything. That was all he would say. I'm writing these notes while our pilot loads the boat. I hope he doesn't notice. It ends there, said Lena, looking up. Must have noticed, said Dune. Or she was afraid he would, so she decided to hide it instead of taking it with her. She must have hoped someone would find it. Just as we did, he pondered. But we might not have if it hadn't been for Poppy. No, and we wouldn't have known that we came here from there. The fiery circle had moved up to the sky now, and the air was so warm that they took off their coats. Absently, Dune dug his finger into the ground, which was soft and crumbly. But what was the disaster that happened in this place, he said. It doesn't look ruined to me. It must have happened a long, long time ago, said Lena. I wonder if people still live here. They sat looking out over the hills, thinking of the woman who had written in the notebook. What had her city been like? Lena wondered. Like Ember in some way, she imagined. A city with trouble where people argued over solutions. A dying city. But it was hard to picture a city like Ember here in this bright, beautiful place. How could anyone have allowed such a place to be harmed? What do we do now? Asked Lena. She wrapped the notebook in its covering again and set it aside. We can't go back up the river and tell them all to come here. No. We could never make the boat go against that current. Are we here alone then forever? Maybe there's another way in. Some way that lets you walk down to Ember. Or maybe there's another river that runs the other way. We have candles now. We could cross the unknown regions if we found a way to get there. This was the only plan they could come up with. So all day long, they searched for another way in. Under the brow of the hill, they found a hole where a stream wandered into the dark. The water was good to drink, but the hole was far too small for them to fit through. There were gullies full of shrubs, and Lena and Dune crawled among the leaves and prickly branches, but found no openings. Bugs buzzed around their ankles and past their eyes, brown earth stained their hands, and pebbles got into their shoes. Their thick, dark, shabby clothes got all full of prickly things, and since they were much too hot anyhow, they took most of them off. They had never felt such warmth against their skin in such soft air. When the bright circle was at the top of the sky, they sat for a while in the shade of one of the tall plants on the side of the hill, in a place where the thick brush gave way to a clearing. Poppy went to sleep, but Lena and Dune sat looking out over the land. Green was everywhere, in different shades, like a huge, brilliant, gorgeous version of the overlapping carpets back in the rooms of Ember. Far away, Lena saw a narrow gray line curving like a pencil stroke across a sweep of green. She pointed this out to Dune, and both of them squinted hard at it, but it was too far away to see clearly. Could it be a road? Said Lena. It could, said Dune. Maybe there are people here after all. I hope so, said Dune. There's so much I want to know. They were still gazing at the far-off bit of gray when they heard something moving in the brush nearby. Leaves rustled. It was a scraping, shuffling sound. They stiffened and held their breath. The shuffling paused and started up again. Was it a person? Should they call out? But before they could decide what to do, a creature stepped into the clearing. It was the same size as Poppy, only lower to the ground, because it walked on 4 legs instead of 2. Its fur was a deep rust red. Its face was a long triangle. Its ears stood up in points, and its black eyes shone. It trotted forward at a few steps, absorbed in its own business. Behind it floated a thick, soft-looking tail. All at once it saw them and stopped. Lena and Dune stayed absolutely still. So did the creature. Then it took a step forward towards them, paused, tilted its head a little, as if to get a better look, and took another step. They could see the sheen of its fur and the glint of light in its eyes. For a moment they stayed like this, frozen, staring at one another. Then, unhurriedly, the creature moved away, pushed its nose among the leaves on the ground, wandering back toward the bushes, and when it raised its head again, they saw that it was holding something in its white teeth. Something round and purplish. With a last glance at them, it leapt toward the bushes, its tail sailing, and disappeared. Lena let out her breath and turned to look at Dune, whose mouth was open in astonishment. His voice shaky, he said, "That was the most wonderful thing I've ever seen, ever in my whole life." "Yes." "And it saw us," Dune said, and Lena nodded. They both felt it. They had both been seen. The creature was utterly strange, not like anything they had ever known. And yet when it looked at them, some kind of recognition passed between them. I now know, said Dune. This is the world we belong in. A few minutes later, Poppy woke up and made fretful noises, and Lena gave her the last of the peas in Dune's pack. What was that, do you think, in the creature's mouth? She asked. Would it be something we could eat, a fruit of some kind? It looked like the pictures of peaches on cans, except for the color. They got up and poked around and soon came across a plant whose branches were laden with purple fruits, about the size of small beets, only softer. Dune picked one and cut it open with his knife. There was a stone inside. Red juice ran out over his hands. Cautiously, he touched his tongue to it. Sweet, he said. If the creature can eat it, maybe we can eat it too, said Lena. Shall we? They did. Nothing had ever tasted better. Lena cut the stones out and gave chunks of the fruit to Poppy. Juice ran down their chins. When they had eaten 5 or 6 apiece, they licked their sticky fingers clean and started to explore again. They went higher up the slope they were on, wading through flowers as high as their waists, and near the top they came upon a kind of dent in the ground, as if a bit of the dirt had caved in. They walked down into it, and at the end of the dent they found a crack about as tall as a person, but not nearly as wide as a door. Lena edged through it sideways and discovered a narrow tunnel. Send Poppy through, she called back to Dune, and come yourself. But it was dark inside, and Dune had to go back to where he left his pack to get a candle. By candlelight, they crept along until they came to a place where the tunnel ended abruptly. But it ended not with a wall, but with a sudden, huge nothingness that made them gasp and step back. A few feet beyond their shoes was a sheer, dizzying drop. They looked out into a cave so enormous that it seemed almost as big as the world outside. Far down at the bottom shone a cluster of lights. It's Ember, Lena whispered. They could see the tiny, bright streets crossing each other, and the squares, little chips of light, and the dark tops of buildings. Just beyond the edges was the immense darkness. Oh, our city, Dune. Our city is at the bottom of a hole. She gazed down through the gulf, and all of what she had believed about the world began to slowly break apart. We were underground, she said. Not just the pipeworks, everything. She could hardly make sense of what she was saying. Dune crouched on his hands and knees, looking over the edge. He squinted, trying to see minute specks that might be people. What's happening there, I wonder? Could they hear us if we shouted? I don't think so. We're much too far up. Maybe if they looked into the sky, they'd see our candle, said Lena. But no, I guess they wouldn't. The street lamps would be too bright. Somehow we've got to get word to them, said Dune. And that was when the idea came to Lena. Our message, she cried. We could send our message. And they did. From her pocket, Lena took the message that Dune had written, and the one that was supposed to have gone to Clary, explaining everything. In small writing, they squeezed in this note at the top. Dear people of Ember, we came down the river from the pipeworks and found the way to another place. It is green here and very big. Light comes from the sky. You must follow the instructions in this message and come on the river. Bring food with you. Come as quickly as you can. Lena Mayfleet and Dune Harrow. They wrapped the message in Dune's shirt and put a rock inside it. Then they stood in a row at the edge of the chasm. Dune in the middle, holding Poppy's hand, and Lena. Lena took aim at the heart of the city, far beneath her feet. With all her strength, she cast the message into the darkness, and they watched as it plunged down and down. Mrs. Murdo, walking even more briskly than usual to keep her spirits up, was crossing Harkin Square when something fell to the pavement just in front of her with a terrific thump. How extraordinary, she thought, bending to pick it up. It was a sort of bundle. She began to untie it. And that is the end of the City of Ember.